Hello, everyone. I want to try this one more time. Today's interview will be with Nicole Kanki. We're going to be talking about forgive yourself, how to work on forgiving others, and just overall mental health. Oh, hi. How you doing?
Good, hello. Hi.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on. I know, busy schedules with sessions and clients and all. 3 o'clock. I guess it's 2 o'clock right there, right? On one.
It's 1 o'clock here. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
we're Pacific time out here.
Yeah. Central time. All right. So, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Nicole Kinky. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist and clinical supervisor. I'm located in California and I work in private practice. And my area of focus is trauma recovery.
Trauma recovery. So, what got you interested in trauma recovery?
So trauma recovery, so I work with people who have experienced violence, who've experienced childhood trauma, sexual assault, variation of war, of different things that have occurred. And what really led me to the field was my first job was working in the foster system.
Yeah.
I was 21, and when you turn 21, you can out here anyway, you can start working in that area. And I got to work at a group home with teenage boys who had, been abused, neglected, had at-risk behaviors. And after I saw the impact that that had on them, I just never turned back. Like I just knew it was my passion. It drove me. It motivated
Mhm.
me to continue to go to school, to go to college. I'm the first one in my family to graduate from college.
Congrats.
Um, which is a huge, yeah, it's a huge
Yeah.
accomplishment. And I think I have to acknowledge that because I know that it took a lot of work, but that's what drove me was seeing the impact that abuse and neglect and trauma had on children. And then, starting to recognize the impact that it had on me, because I also experienced childhood trauma, but there was a lot of denial and like minimizing that had occurred. So I like almost unconsciously started working in the field, and
Mhm.
then throughout the process of school and working in the field, I started to realize like, oh, there's something going on with me as well. So I'm diagnosed with PTSD and major
Yeah.
depression.
Yeah.
And, I didn't start going to therapy until my master's program where they require us to go to therapy.
Yes, me too.
And yeah, I was the first one in my family to go to therapy as well. And so, part of our master's program, they had us look at our family system because I'm a MFT, I'm a licensed marriage family therapist. So our lens is based on the family and family systems and how, generational trauma is passed down in families. And so like one of my first classes, they have you do like a family genogram and you look at all these patterns. And I was like, I remember having a panic attack in my first
Yeah.
class because I was like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
there's all this trauma in my family and I don't want to repeat it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and that's the thing. One of the very fascinating things about every master's program that kind of revolves around counseling is they make you do these things so you can discover yourself. Because if you can't discover yourself, it's going to be difficult to help other people, right? Which is one of the reasons I find your username very, very fascinating. You call it, I mean, it's the wounded healer, right? And the combination of those two words alone, like it says a lot about the profession in general.
Absolutely. And I got that name from Carl Jung. I think he's the one who talks about the archetype of the wounded healer. And a lot of clinicians, we come into the field because we want to help people and unconsciously not realizing that we're wounded as well. And we have to identify what our wounds are so that we don't bring that into the room and project that onto our clients in the work that we do. It's
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah, yes. I know. Like my professor then told asked everybody in class and said, "Hey, why are you here?" And everyone went around saying, "Oh, I want to help people." Da, 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 giving all the whole spiel. And then he just paused everyone and said, "Hey, I know you think you're trying to help people, but at the end of the day, somehow, some way, shape, or form, you're unconsciously trying to help yourself as well." Yeah, and that kind of blew my mind. Yeah.
It's exactly right.
So, you work with trauma, and with trauma comes a whole lot of, I mean, trauma has a major layers of healing, and that is needed. And one of them is forgiveness, right? What do you think, what's the impact of forgiveness on a person's mental health?
So when you've been, violated in any kind of way, so a lot of the people I see, have experienced a violation, abuse, neglect, those kinds of things. What can happen in childhood, especially, is a lot of people will internalize that abuse and they'll start to have this negative dialogue about themselves and the world around them. Because children oftentimes, they can't see their parents as toxic, right? So they'll internalize it. It must be something that's wrong with me. And so there's this experience of like shame and guilt. Sometimes it can go external as well, right? So rage and anger.
Yes.
And really what I used to run anger management with teens, and one of my favorite quotes to put on the board is a quote by Buddha, who says, holding on to anger is like swallowing poison and expecting the other person to die. You recognize that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And because it's toxic, right? And so it consumes our psyche.
Yeah, it really
And
does. It really does. And it's just one of those things that like you mentioned, there is, when a person experiences trauma, there's that place where they self-blame. And especially when it happens from a parent or a caregiver or a loved one or a trusted one, right? It's so difficult to completely hate that person, even if they've wronged you in so many ways. And then sometimes that pain gets internalized and becomes like self-hate. And then there's the self-sabotaging behaviors that comes after that, and on and on and on and on. So forgiveness in itself has so many layers that we'll talk about today. Yeah.
it's really a deep concept. Um, and that's always my concern, is that it's gonna manifest into self-hatred, self-sabotaging, suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, vengefulness, which again, I don't think that's a pleasant experience for anyone. And so that's a lot of, taking down, like you said, the layers of healing, and then this process, because forgiveness is a process. It's not something that you just, oh, I forgive the person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that simple.
Yes. Forgiveness is actually something that you have to actively do almost every day, because you're still going to remember the stuff that you're resentful for. And you still have to remind yourself, like, okay, hey, I've forgiven this person, but yeah.
If you've made the decision to forgive the person, right? Because I
Yeah.
think, and that has to start with just the other thing that I was thinking is acknowledging the hurt. Because a lot of times, and that was my experience with mental health, is that I wasn't acknowledging that I was in pain. I was just like, oh, I forgive the person and moving on. And I'd learned that that's what forgiveness meant, that it meant that it was okay that they did that. And it's not okay. And
Yeah.
and that's another thing, like defining what forgiveness actually means. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that word.
Yes. And there's a forgiveness worksheet I use with my clients, and it specifically says what forgiveness is. And one of the two things that I remember very clearly is, one, forgiveness is not saying that the person was right? And forgiveness does not mean that you need to continue being around the person. Those are the two
Yeah,
major
you
things
don't
that I
have
take
to
from.
be in a relationship with them to forgive them.
Yes. Yeah, things don't have to go back to being rosy and everything and all of that for you to forgive them. Yeah. Okay. So because forgiveness is very difficult, and I saw this in one of your videos on your page. Everyone, you need to check it out, by the way. Because forgiveness is very difficult, like what steps would you recommend that a person should take towards forgiving a friend, someone they love, friend or family member who has wronged them?
Well, the first step, I think, is identifying like who the person is, right? And then, do I want to continue to have a relationship with them? Um, and a lot of it, I think, also comes from developing your own self-compassion. Because what I find is that the more compassionate I am towards myself, the more compassionate I am towards others. And so then I'm able to better forgive them for their humanity.
Mhm.
And that's such a big part of the process because we're mind, body, spirit. And I guess a lot of what I think about too is, you know, you hold some of those resentments in your body. So some of it is also learning how to like nourish yourself if you do fall into the self-hatred. Like if you've been hurt and you've started to get this narrative that you're unworthy, you've probably started to behave that way too. So some of it's also behavioral change. If you can't change the thought process, because sometimes that's the problem is you have these negative thoughts and you can't change them until you've started to treat yourself differently.
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Like, because like eventually, I mean, if you hang out around mud, eventually you're gonna get mud around you. It's the same concept. If you have negative self-concepts about yourself, you're gonna start acting that way. Yeah, naturally.
Uh-huh. And then you're going to start treating people that way. Like when
Yes.
I got out of my abusive relationship, I had this narrative that everybody was against me and I couldn't trust anybody anymore. And then I started to perceive, you know, these small maybe conflicts as something much, much bigger than it was or needed to be, because that's what happens with trauma is you're getting all the feelings from the past coming up. And then
Yes.
also learning how to manage those emotions is a huge piece of this as well, because you have to feel it to heal it.
Yes. 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 I like that statement. Feel it to heal it. Yeah. And another layer that, I mean, oh man, it just kind of slipped my mind. Another layer that I was thinking about too when it comes to forgiveness is at what point, I guess this is the adequate. At what point do we feel that it is necessary? I mean, because some of my clients have told me like, do I have to forgive them to heal? And sometimes I've said, sometimes I've said, well, it's up to you. So at what point is it necessary for someone to say, okay, hey, for me to go through what the PTSD that you just talked about right now? Because if you're not forgiving someone, then you're going to think everybody's the same way. At what point is it right to say, okay, hey, you know what? I need to forgive this person.
I think that's a really big question, right?
Yeah.
And we're each, and that's the other part of trauma healing is agency, you know, choice. Because a lot of times if you've been violated, those things have been taken away. And so a huge part of it is you have to make the choice internally. You have to recognize this is harming me. This is harming my relationships. This is harming me at work, you know, whichever way it's trickling out. Because like you said, when you're in the mud, right, all this mud is around you. And if you can recognize that you're hurting people, because hurt people,
Yes.
and you know you're not healing, you're stuck in a cycle, you're stuck in, you know, these icky yucky feelings. I think that those are good indicators that there's something that you're not letting go of, there's
Yeah.
something that you're holding on to. um
Hmm. And the cycle will keep repeating itself over and over again until you make a change.
yes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So you
And that
mentioned
might
something.
require you to change behavior, right? That
Mhm.
might require you to change a way of thinking about somebody, you know, because a lot of times we want to villainize people. We want to put them in these boxes. And like I said, we forget their humanity, that we're so layered as people, as human beings.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes. And with trauma, I guess, and that's why trauma is very, 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 very complicated. Um, when you're hurt and it's tough to forgive the other person, and then you start hurting other people, then you start having that guilt, and then self-forgiveness comes into place. How do you forgive yourself for the things that you've done?
yeah, that's a really big question, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of what I've learned through my own process is learning mindfulness, learning how to be in the present moment, um, which is, you know, forgiving myself for past patterns of behavior. Because a lot of times, like you said, when you've been hurt, you start to self-sabotage. And self-sabotage can look really yucky. Like it can be, you know, really, you know, stigmatized addictions that come along with that. You know, you could isolate from people. You could, you could yourself start to project the anger out towards others. You can become verbally aggressive towards people. I have a history of that, and I've had to really forgive myself for that because it's not in alignment with my values. And that's another part of it, is identifying, because you kind of lose yourself through all of the pain, identifying what your values are. Like, one of my core values is compassion. And so if I notice I'm not behaving in a compassionate way, I'm not thinking in a compassionate way, then I'm in disalignment.
Yes.
And
you're not
and
being
then
yourself.
my mental health is deteriorating. It's in this horrible spiritual health as well.
Yeah. So at that point, like, if you can find your values, right, you can correct certain behaviors that you've adapted as a result of the trauma.
And recognizing that those are behaviors that are, it was reframed for me by my therapist, actually, that a lot of the behaviors that I engaged in were self-protection. And so it's harmful. I don't want to continue to behave that way, but recognizing why I did it in that moment, and that was the best that I could do in that moment. But then committing to changing the behavior, committing to be, gentle with myself, compassionate with myself, to change, because it is such a process.
Yeah. It
doesn't happen overnight. I don't get to just be like, oh, I'm going to be compassionate today, because life continues to happen.
It's a different level of mindfulness. It's kind of like understanding that, hey, who I was yesterday is not who I am right now, right? If we can think about things in those terms, I read that on the post recently, that if you can think about how your parents hurt you, and understanding that they did what they did because of the developmental stage they were in, things can be a whole lot different in how you forgive.
Absolutely. Looking back and seeing, like, even in my family system, like, why did all this toxicity, all these toxic patterns happen, and someone wrote down here, I think it's Vanessa, fight, flight, freeze. You're in survival mode. And I think about it a lot because my primary caregiver had an addiction in my childhood. And something he would say to me often when I would speak to him is, I'm surviving. And he was in survival mode. Like, he wasn't, he was struggling so much that how could you be a parent when you're in survival mode?
Yes.
But getting to the place of understanding that and grasping that and acknowledging what the impact was of that, and then forgiving it, because it makes so much sense if you can look at where it originates from.
Yes. To know, my favorite quote is, to know who you are, you need to understand why you are. You need to understand why you have certain behaviors and certain patterns. And that's how you can fully understand yourself. And so digging through all of that past, like, kind of like you said, finding the origin of the trauma. Maybe great-great-grandma did this to grandma, who did this to mom, who did this to me. Like, understanding those patterns can help you break those patterns so you don't transfer it to the next generation.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's how we take our power back. That's how we empower ourselves. And really, I think that's a piece of forgiving ourselves, is breaking those patterns. Each time that you make a different choice, you're breaking those patterns. And it's so empowering. It builds your confidence up, because a lot of times the feeling of unworthiness is what's driving also, these negative behaviors.
Yeah, it's like, I don't deserve this, right? Yeah. And that's when all the self-sabotaging behaviors come into place. So it's all like a cycle. Like, you made it a lot better for me to understand. Like, it's a cycle that happens of trauma happens, self-resentment happens afterwards, and then just goes on and on and on and on like that in the circle, and back to the trauma of you inflicting that to someone else. Because hurt people. Yeah. Awesome. So this has been very enlightening. So if anybody wants to reach out to you for counseling, for coaching, for anything, how can they reach out to you?
So I'm on Instagram. Wounded Healer 1111 is my username. And then underneath it, there's my website, which is the group that I practice at. And you can just go on that website to reach out, to email me, or if you want to be connected to any of the clinicians that are there, because we have a variety of clinicians that are available. And I'm only licensed in the state of California. So if you wanted clinical individual therapy or group therapy, it's only provided in California.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for everybody watching this. I mean, Nicole, she has awesome content. Go check her page out. It is really good. I get some stuff from it too. And yeah, thank you so much for being on. I know you have a busy schedule today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for inviting me. It was really nice to meet you and get to chat with you. I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, hopefully. And then we can do a podcast.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
love that. Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Thank you. You have a very good one.
Oh, you have a good day. Thanks, hon.